Yellow and Red mix by Digits 27, Chapter 26. Naruto rounded the corner as a practical blonde and a black blur with Anko, Gaara, and Takuya actually struggling to keep up as he raced off. Naruto was just worried about Tsunade. If Orochimaru could kill Hiruzen despite his age, then Tsunade would be hard-pressed at best. Anko was just wondering how Naruto could be so fast while Takuya and Garo were keeping their opinions to themselves. However, Takuya was starting to feel some pain in her shoulder as her anger flared over Orochimaru. It took them less than a minute to reach the castle, or at least where the castle used to be. Now it was nothing more than smoke and rubble. They weren't sure whether this was Tsunade or Orochimaru's doing, but it didn't matter when Naruto quickly spotted the trail of destruction leading away from it. Without stopping for more than a few seconds, he was off again, not even giving his companions time to catch up. He arrived at the battlefield in another few seconds, earning him a few strange glances from both Orochimaru and the bespectacled man beside him. They weren't expecting anybody to arrive so quickly and suddenly, not that either of them were worried by it in the slightest. Naruto felt his anger growing just looking at the pale man currently across from Tsunade, but he held back Kyuubi's chakra. It wouldn't do him good to lose himself right now. He spared a fleeting glance at Tsunade, who had a few splatters of blood over her clothes, which thankfully didn't appear to be hers. However, she seemed to be in some kind of shock, and he couldn't help but wonder just what Orochimaru had done to her to make her this way. He snarled but kept his emotions in check as he turned back to the snake Sanin and his irritating assistant. Kabuto, I knew I smelled Orochimaru on you at the Chunin exams. The white-haired youth just smiled mockingly, pushing up his glasses out of his nose, as if Naruto's very presence was less than a concern. It's good to see you too, Naruto. I have yet to pay you back for what you did to me and my team. Naruto just rolled his eyes, making sure it popped a few times as the rest of his companions hopped into view behind him. Sorry, but I don't have time for you right now. He turned and stared straight at Orochimaru, who gave him an equally mocking smile. Interesting. The Kyuubi brat thinks he can take me on. Perhaps I ought to give an overconfident Jinchuriki a lesson in humility. Naruto growled, but once again held back the overwhelming tide of Kyuubi's chakra, begging to be released into his system. I don't need Kyuubi to deal with you. His voice was really starting to sound like a roar now, but his coils remained purely his own chakra. Kabuto merely sneered as green chakra coated his hand into a blade, which he quickly pointed in their direction. To get to Lord Orochimaru, you must first pass me, Naruto. Before Naruto could even reply, Kabuto sprinted across the field, covering the distance in moments. Naruto bent into a mere defensive stance, but at this last second, Kabuto veered off and aimed a lethal strike at Tsunade with a gleeful grin on his face. But first, I think I should deal with Lady Tsunade here. The chakra scalpel came down in a long arc as time seemed to slow down. The blade would have landed in a lethal, most definitely fatal blow on the blonde Sanin had it not been for Uncle's timely intervention. She dived in front of the woman, taking the blow against her crossed arms, crying out in pain as muscle and bones were severed. Kabuto just gave an annoyed sneer at the woman who blocked his strike. The snake Sanin looked upon his first apprentice with a sigh, thinking of all those years he wasted on her. Kabuto flared the scalpel again, figuring he might as well finish off the pesky Tokubetsu Jonin, but once again his attack was interrupted as Naruto dashed past, picking up Anko in the process and moving her to a safer location. Kabuto growled a little in annoyance as he jumped back to Orochimaru's side before Naruto could return and finish him. Orochimaru smiled a little, although it wasn't entirely pleasant. My dear uncle, how good it is to see you again. Anko couldn't reply as she bit back the pain from Kabuto's attack, but she managed to spit some blood in the pale man's direction. Orochimaru gave a more visible sigh, but returned his attention to the more bothersome people. Ah, is Orochimaru not here? We could have had one big happy reunion. Naruto cursed under his breath that they had forgotten the sage back in the hotel. Takuya, you need to get back and get Jiraiya. We won't be able to do this without him. Toya shot him a look that clearly said she was against the idea. Come on, shithead, the fucker can't even use his arms. Naruto caught the glare Orochimaru sent the redhead. How fucking dangerous could he be? Naruto sent her a gaze that brokered no argument. Toya, we don't have time to argue. Just get Jiraiya. Toya scowled, and the mark on her shoulder pulsed painfully, shifting ever so slightly as her gaze flickered between Naruto and Orochimaru. The snake Sanin took great notice of this, his mouth twisting into a sickening smile as he noted that information down for later. Fine, but you owe me, shithead. Naruto just nodded quickly as Toya turned and sprinted back in the direction they came from. Now Naruto could focus his full attention on Orochimaru. Gaara, I need you to take care of Kabuto. The other redhead looked at him questioningly, but nodded nevertheless, shifting his stance to better face the apprentice as sand leaked from his gourd. Ah, that's cute. I get to play with the little fox. Naruto was really starting to get irritated by Orochimaru, and the longer that went on, the more likely it was he would tap Kyuubi's power. He ignored it as best he could and shrugged off his jacket, holding it out in front of him briefly before dropping it to the ground. Everybody, even Orochimaru, stared a moment at the small crater the jacket created as it struck the earth, managing to send up plumes of dust from its weight. Naruto only cracked his knuckles once as he disappeared from sight, appearing less than a second later behind Orochimaru. He was already in the process of delivering a swift kick, which might have shattered the man's skull if he hadn't suddenly bent his body forward. Underneath the attack, he followed up with a devastating axe kick, which Orochimaru also dodged, bending his body at impossible angles to escape his fast attacks. Interesting. So the boy is fast. Naruto ignored him as he continued a relentless assault, which only earned him glancing blows, which did little to hinder Orochimaru's movement, as the man continued to contort and twist away from every attack Naruto would deliver. Finally, after he had enough, Naruto flickered and reappeared a few meters away from the man, still not tired despite the speed he had been moving. Impressive stamina as well. But not enough. Naruto cursed under his breath. He still wasn't fast enough fast enough, despite all the training he had gone through. Just for that effect, he narrowed his eyes in irritation, but soon smirked. And in action, Orochimaru didn't miss. And what is so funny, Brat? That your friends are about to die, that the village you once lived in will be razed to the ground. Naruto shook his head, still smiling, which actually caused the smallest of frowns to appear on Orochimaru's normally flippant features. It's not that. I might not be fast enough. He looked up as two very unique but very recognizable kunai dropped out of the seals in his wrist into his awaiting hands. But the fourth Hokage is. Orochimaru snarled in anger as his eyes opened wide at the sight of the legendary weapons. That's impossible. A brat like you learning the Hiraishin, even I couldn't learn it. Naruto shrugged in such a flippant manner it set the snake sun in seething. He used that opportunity to launch out a fair number of kunai, littering the field with them all around Orochimaru. Inside, Orochimaru still didn't believe that the boy could do it. That this was all a trick just to get under his skin. It was no small secret that Orochimaru secretly resented the fourth, but he stole the position because he stole the position of Hokage from him. However, his unspoken question was answered when Naruto just disappeared, not leaving so much as an afterimage. Immediately, Orochimaru felt a heavy blow from behind, but when he whirled around to block the follow-up, there was nobody there. The exact same thing happened, but now Orochimaru wasn't taking chances. In a flash, Kusanagi was out of his throat and held in his mouth, ready as when Naruto next appeared. Orochimaru tried to take the boy's head off with an upward swing. Naruto dodged the blow, sliding under the blade before coming up within Orochimaru's slapping him fiercely in the chest before disappearing once again. Orochimaru growled out in annoyance, and at that godforsaken technique before he suddenly frowned. He slapped me. Naruto appeared again next to the kunai nearest Anko and Tsunade. The pineapple-haired Kunoichi was staring at the blonde in disbelief, while Tsunade was still trapped in whatever it was that petrified her. Naruto went down on one knee, panting for breath. He was still unused to using that technique, and it took a lot out of him. Orochimaru was still snarling where Naruto had left him, Kusanagi still in his mouth, as he stared at Naruto with unbiding hatred. Right now, there was just an image of Minato over the boy, an image Orochimaru would very gladly wipe off the planet. Naruto stood up after catching his breath, just as Tanya and Jiraiya returned to the scene. Jiraiya didn't look all that great, swaying slightly as he ran, and his eyes seemed to be swaying. However, they quickly focused on the kunai scattered across the field. Naruto, what? Naruto just panted, waiting for the last of his energy to return. Not now, Jiraiya. I can explain later. The Toad Sage didn't seem satisfied with that. For far too curious about the technique Naruto was using, he didn't give him a chance for any other questions as he made a one-handed seal and four more of him popped into existence. Orochimaru seemed to have calmed down by now and was back to his normal mocking smile. Really, boy, you think that it would only take 5 of you to beat me? It was Naruto's turn to smile as he grinned at Orochimaru. No, the 4 clones all grabbed onto Naruto's arm as blue swirling chakra coalesced into a Rasengan. Just one. The ball of energy swiftly grew to the size of a man, making Naruto wince as he fought against the large vortex of energy. Orochimaru had to concede that it was an impressive technique, but he would never allow Naruto any more near him to use it. And by now, he had suddenly moved away from all the kunai littering the field. Unfortunately for him, he failed to remember the slap that Naruto had given him earlier, only realizing what had happened when Naruto disappeared with a wink. Everybody on the field watched in amazement as Naruto blinked into existence above Orochimaru, driving the massive Rasengan into the man's unprotected head. The ground around the snake-sounding feet erupted as the massive energies were finally released, and his body was lost to the intense flash of light that followed. Naruto reappeared next to Tayuya and Jiraiya, who were still staring at the dust cloud Naruto had created with the attack. He once again fell to one knee, feeling completely drained. Using 2 of his most powerful techniques simultaneously was difficult to say the least. He joined everybody in watching the dust slowly clear. Even Gaara and Kabuto had stopped their battle to wait in anticipation. Finally, everything settled, and they could all witness Orochimaru's limp body lying at the center of a decent-sized crater. Both the remaining Sannin and Kabuto just hung their jaw at their former teammate and leader's apparent defeat. Unfortunately for them, they were too quick to judge as the body writhed for a moment before two burned and rotting hands emerged from the man's mouth. Using what little dexterity the limbs had left, the arms pulled themselves out of the body like a snake shedding its skin. Soon Orochimaru was standing before them, shaking off a thin layer of slime, not looking at all hurt, minus his still erect arms. Tayuya felt like she might puke from the vile rebirth technique, while everybody else shared similar sentiments. By now, Naruto was seething that his most powerful technique were still not enough to kill this guy. Why won't you just die? Orochimaru let out a small laugh, which abruptly ended when he began to see vile orange chakra leak out of Orochimaru's pores. It happened quicker than anybody was expecting. Naruto dropped down on all fours as the cloak overtook him, 3 tails rising up in sync. Just! Naruto vanished in a flash of speed, once again appearing over Orochimaru as he brought his fleshly clawed hands over in a powerful swipe. Die! The crater Orochimaru had been standing in doubled in size as the force of Naruto's blow crushed the man into the ground. A chakra-cloaked Naruto looked at the base of the crater in anger. After seeing that the snake sounding wasn't there, he reappeared a few dozen feet away, melting out of the ground like it was water. Naruto's slitted eyes narrowed as the pale snake chuckled in his direction. Poor Naruto, so weak as to rely on the Kyuubi's chakra. It was a bluff, of course. Had Orochimaru been anyone else, he would surely have died from that Rasengan, but it served its desired effect. Naruto gripped the ground even harder, sending out enough killer intent that Orochimaru actually felt like he was staring the Biju in the face, and even for him, that was a pleasant experience. You want to see Kyuubi's chakra? Naruto's grip on the ground was beginning to splinter it as the chakra emanating from his body swirled around him in a small maelstrom. Then I'll give you Kyuubi's chakra! Orochimaru watched in fascination as Naruto's skin began to peel off, revealing the pure swirling chakra beneath. It writhed and glowed an ominous red as Naruto's flesh continued to shed itself away from the burning force. Gaara! It was Tayuya calling out, and the usually stoic Sand user nodded in worry. Already already directing his hand away from Kabuto, who was too transfixed on the scene unfolding to capitalize. The sand rushed at Naruto, who was still in the process of changing between states. The fourth tail still hadn't quite grown. The sand swirled under the Jinchuriki's feet, forming into a complex seal on the ground with Naruto at its center. When it was complete, the complex seal shone in a brilliant white, which caused many of the people present to shield their eyes. When it cleared, a very badly burned but thankfully chakra-free Naruto lay at its center again. Orochimaru had watched all this in interest, but he was now low on chakra thanks to the oral rebirth technique. He certainly didn't have enough to take on Jiraiya, who seemed to have recovered from the worst of his poisoning by Tsunade's hands. However, he felt he did have enough for one last burst of speed to take care of a pest he was sure would be a thorn in his side in the future. He sprinted to Naruto's prone form, Kusanagi at the ready to deliver the final blow, only for a different blonde blur to get in the way. Tsunade coughed out blood as the sword pierced her stomach, cringing from the pain when she moved. Orochimaru just sighed and took out the blade, earning another wince from the elderly blonde. Tsunade, finally overcoming your hemophobia only to die by my sword. Tsunade grimaced through the pain, but managed to stand up to her full height, ignoring the blood that rushed from her wound. But really, Tsunade, for this brat, you would give up your life? Tsunade couldn't reply because of the pain, but she managed to nod, earning a last laugh from her old teammate. I should have expected as much from you, I guess. Orochimaru paused as the diamond on Tsunade's forehead suddenly enveloped her in a complex and beautiful seal. He was even more impressed when the wound through her stomach instantly sealed itself, and he smirked in amusement. He knew he wouldn't last long in this fight, not with both Tsunade and Jiraiya. Instead, he jumped back as far as he could, already motioning with his head to his assistant. Kabuto, it's time we depart. I've had enough of seeing my old teammates and their pet fox. Kabuto nodded and appeared next to his master, shunching them both away from the scene quickly. When they were gone, Jiraiya, Gaara, and Taiga all rushed to Naruto's side, the red-headed girl falling onto her knees next to him. The blonde just smiled weakly up at them, wincing every so often from the pain of so many burns. Good thing that seal worked, then, Gaara. The flippant comment earned him a small slap on the head, courtesy of Toya, before he finally passed out from the pain. Tsunade made a short work of repairing Uncle's arms and healing Naruto's body, her reputation as the Elemental Nation's best medical shinobi standing true. Now they were all anxiously waiting in Jiraiya's room for Naruto to wake up. They had a lot of questions for the boy, but given the time, Jiraiya thought he would at least get some other matters out of the way. So Tsunade, would you take the position now? The elder blonde was still warily staring down at Naruto, lying on the bed peacefully. I think so, Jiraiya. The Toad Sage quirked an eyebrow at the odd response, but he figured it was better than a straight no, so he let it slide. The room settled back into an awkward silence as everybody was at lost at what to do while they waited for Naruto to wake up. Luckily, they weren't kept waiting for long, and before long, Naruto cracked an eye open. What happened to Orochimaru? Everyone perked up at his voice, and Taiga rushed over, hugging him, which managed to surprise everyone present. Uncle, on the other hand, merely raised an eyebrow, smirking. Naruto winced from the pain in his recently repaired skin, but returned the hug all the same. Taiga, for once, didn't care about the encroaching blush, as she allowed people to see her concern for Naruto. Of course, she had a limit and soon pulled away, slapping him around the head playfully. Don't worry me like that, shithead. If you die, then who the fuck am I going to torture? Naruto just grinned as he knew this was just her way of showing she was worried, and he nodded his thanks. Gaara didn't come over, but he nodded in Naruto's direction, giving a small smile which let the blonde know everything he needed to know. Finally, he caught the concerned glances of both Tsunade and Suzune before Jiraiya managed to ruin the moment. Alright, brat, tell me how you learned the Horaishin, and more importantly, he held up one of the kunai the Naruto had used, which the five of them managed to collect from the battlefield. Where did you get these? Naruto just grinned, sheepishly rubbing the back of his head as he glanced between the kunai and Jiraiya. It's kind of a long story. Jiraiya's look made it clear they had time. It was a few months after their mission to retrieve the money from Tsunade, and life had pretty much returned to normal for the two Jinchuriki and Taiga. Naruto didn't exactly remember the exact prank he had pulled, but he did know that he was now running through the streets of Suna at top speed. Anbu were behind him, yet Naruto managed to outpace them thanks to his inherent speed, which had been training regularly over the years. He ducked and weaved through the crowded streets, using the people as cover to escape. When he thought he was finally out of sight of the Anbu, he ducked into a nearby alleyway, continuing to sprint so as to put as much distance between himself and his pursuers. Finally, he figured he was far enough away and rested against the wall. Panting from the running, but smiling all the same, he looked around himself to get a bearing for where he was, recognizing the area immediately. He was in the poor area of Suna's civilian district, where mostly refugees and the poorest residents eked out a living. If Naruto had to compare it to anything, then it would be the area he himself had lived in back in Konoha. The walls around him were shabby and covered in graffiti, but he wasn't exactly given much time to admire the surroundings as a kunai came out of nowhere, embedding itself in the wall next to him. You! He panicked at the attack. The Anbu had never been this aggressive before. Then again, he had been standing deadly still, and Anbu wouldn't have missed like that. He turned to where a kunai had came from, only to see a very elderly man clutching another kunai and looking like he was about to throw it. He was squinting, and it was obviously he was either completely or mostly blind, thanks to his cloudy and sun-stained eyes. Hey, watch where you're throwing those things, old man. You could have hit me. The man seemed to start at Naruto's voice, like it wasn't what he had been expecting. He kept the kunai poised to throw as he approached, squinting hard to see through his blindness, but he ascertained it was just a boy. He immediately lowered the knife, looking very sheepish as he pocketed it and came closer to Naruto. I'm terribly sorry about that, young man. My eyes don't see all that well anymore, and I mistook you for somebody else. Naruto was still angry at almost being hit with the kunai, but now he was at least somewhat curious. Who? The elderly man sighed and motioned to a nearby house. It was a bit dilapidated, but wasn't all that bad. I'll tell you inside over some tea. It's the least I can do for almost killing you. Naruto nodded. There were a few better things he could do, but Naruto dropped it. Once inside, and after the man had poured some tea, Naruto stared at him curiously. You're not from Suna, are you? The man chuckled and shook his head. No, I'm not, but I can say the same for you. Even with these old eyes, I know that blonde hair is most uncommon in these parts. If you must know, I'm actually from Iwa. Naruto seemed surprised by that, but the man seemed troubled by some memories, so he decided to not pry. So, who did you mistake me for? The man chuckled as if it was the silliest thing in the world and rubbed the back of his head in a manner that reminded Naruto of himself. I actually mistook you for Minato Namikaze, if you could believe that. Upon seeing Naruto's blank look, he clarified, That's the fourth Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves. Naruto nodded in understanding. He had never heard the man's name before, which upon reflection was rather strange. But why would you attack me if I looked like the fourth Hokage? He was a hero to the Hidden Leaf Village. The man nodded, but there was a scowl on his face, obviously picturing some bad memories. A hero to them, but in Iwa he is thought of a little differently. During the Third Shinobi War, Minato Namikaze was the man who single-handedly killed a third of Iwa's forces. Naruto's eyes grew to the size of dinner plates. I know he was supposed to be dead, but in Iwa he is still infamous. Naruto nodded, but by now he was just marveling at the accomplishment. How did he do something like that? The elderly man sighed deeply. A powerful technique that was unique to the man, the Horaishin. It allowed him to instantly move himself to any location marked by a special seal he could place. He used to put them onto special kunai that he would throw into the battlefield, allowing him to move around faster than was physically possible. It was how he earned himself the nickname the Yellow Flash. By now, Naruto was in complete awe of the man. To do something like that was like a dream. The man suddenly looked up, remembering something. Actually, now that I think about it, he trailed off and stood from the couch, moving into a back room where Naruto heard him move some things around, making a clatter. If I remember right, it should be right around. There was more general sounds of movement before. Here! The man came back into the room and sat down on the couch, tightly clutching something in a small blanket. He unwrapped it on the table and revealed a very strange three-pronged kunai, covered in various seals that Naruto didn't have a clue how to decipher. This was one of his kunai. There were so many left in the battlefield that some of us decided to take some home as souvenirs. At the time, it seemed like a good idea, something to show our kids to say we survived the Yellow Flash. In retrospect, it was completely idiotic. We took them into our homes despite knowing that the man could teleport to any one of them at will. Luckily, it didn't come to that, as not soon after the Tsuchikage surrendered, and soon after that the QB attacked Konoha. The man didn't notice the imperceptible flinch Naruto let out at those words. I'll tell you what, why don't you take it? Naruto stared at the man in a mix between appreciation and disbelief. But why? The old man sighed while looking at the simple weapon. It brings back too many painful memories. I should have gotten rid of it a long time ago. Naruto was too young to understand completely, but he got the idea and accepted the legendary kunai with a thankful nod. Sorry again about almost trying to kill you. Naruto shared a chuckle with the old man, but inside he was in turmoil. If he could learn a technique like that, then he would be unstoppable. Well, that's all well and good, but even I couldn't figure out the horizon, so how did you do it? Naruto blinked at being interrupted from his narrative by Jiraiya, who was currently pleading with him in his eyes. Come on, kid. Mino tried to explain it to me, but I couldn't understand. How did he do it? Naruto just shrugged. I don't know. Everyone in the room except Tanya and Gaara face faulted at those words, and Jiraiya was the first to recover. What do you mean you don't know? I saw you use it. Naruto shrugged again, and Jiraiya looked about ready to strangle the boy. What I mean is I have no idea how he did it. Jiraiya looked at him questionably. I gave up trying to figure out the technique ages ago. He smirked a little at Jiraiya's thoroughly confused expression. But out there I saw, and then what? Naruto chuckled again as Jiraiya finally found a grip. I made my own version. That dropped the jaws of all four non-Suna residents. Seeing that they weren't going to recover anytime soon, Naruto continued. It actually came to be by accident. I remember one day I got really frustrated trying to actually to work out the seal on the kunai. I gave up and sealed it away in a special scroll I always kept, and for some reason that got me thinking. I started to wonder where things went when you sealed them into scrolls. Jiraiya actually seemed to give this little thought, the question striking him as odd. I used QB as an example. She's in my stomach, but she couldn't actually fit in there, so she would have to be put on some kind of other dimension. Jiraiya nodded at the logic. So that made me think that if there was some kind of seal for sealing things in, then there had to be a seal on the other side to allow them into the other dimension. Then I just worked out what the seal was, which is a lot harder than it sounds. Jiraiya began to see where Naruto was going with this. After what I found, I could just place a normal but very powerful sealing mark on my body, then put the inverse mark on anything I wanted to go onto, and I could instantly teleport. It was a difficult, more complicated than that. I had to first disconnect the original seal from its usual exit seal and link it up to my new ones. Plus, I had to sort out jumping to multiple exits from one to only one entrance, but that's the general idea. Naruto finished to a room in complete silence as everyone took in what Naruto had just told them. Basically, a simplified and actually usable version of the famed Hiraishin. Gaki, that was the most incredible thing I've ever heard. How long did all that take you? Naruto looked at Uncle and furrowed his brow, trying to remember. I'm not sure. It all kind of passed in a blur. Taiya chuckled from her spot across the room. If you count all the time he was locked away in his room with fuck tons of scrolls and ink, then it was about a year. Jiraiya raised his brow at that. That was a lot of time for such a young kid to be dedicated to learning one move. Then again, he couldn't exactly argue with the results. I have to agree with Uncle. That technique is astounding. He sidled up to Naruto's side and wiggled his eyebrows. Maybe you could impart your knowledge to an old man. Everyone in the room sweat dropped at the old sage practically begging somebody a fifth of his age for a technique. Naruto just grinned broadly, a smile that you and Gaara recognized well. Maybe depends what you're willing to do for it. Gaara nodded excitedly, while Taya and Gaara shook their heads. The old sage had no idea. End of chapter 26.